Okay, I'm going to give a quick overview of the essay questions here. So you are going to be required to answer two of these on your midterm, and these should be pretty substantive. If you look at the questions, there's a decent number of things that they ask you to do, and really just doing those in some detail. I kind of like to underline detail, thoroughness, complexity. To do those well is going to require a fairly substantive response. So I think I might suggest this, it's just a suggestion, but you might break each question down into the like 4 or 5 different things that it asks you to do. Answer those separate things separately and try to kind of get each one answered well and with some level of detail, rigor, and thoroughness, but just kind of hitting one at a time. Don't even think about the others, and then put them together. And then there'll be some kind of weaving together of those, but it doesn't have to be like an essay. But that might be just a nice way to approach it. So I'm just going to quickly go over here the different aspects that would go into answering each of those. Okay. Okay, so the emotion question. Here, I'm really asking what the argument is that Nozick gives that emotions are not just feelings. It's one thing for Nozick to merely state or assert that emotions are not just feelings. Philosophically, that's not that interesting. Even if he's right, it's really only interesting philosophically if you make an argument for that. And in a critical thinking class, of course, that's really our focus. What's the argument? So we might rightly ask that of Nozick. Okay, interesting account of emotion, but what's the argument? So I want you to do your best to construct what the actual argument is. He has one there. The way he presents it is kind of informal, kind of like telling a little story, and we can see he's trying to kind of prove a point, but let's see how far we can go to actually exhibit the logic of his argument. In class, I had up on the board a little modus tollens argument that we can see him giving here, where P would be emotions are just feelings. And if you look at modus tollens, you might be able to kind of piece that together. Clue. Okay, it's not the only way to do it then. Okay. Okay. Now, also, why does it follow logically from what an emotion is that there are criteria of evaluation and why they are the specific criteria of emotional evaluation that he states? So again, this actually is a second argument. It follows now that we've argued for the emotion as more than a feeling view. Now another thing that follows from that logically is that there are these criteria of evaluation. Tell us why. How does that follow logically? Okay. I think also here, what do you think of his criteria? Maybe there's some questions you might have whether he's right to say that there are these criteria of emotional evaluation. Here, construct a little emotional episode, just a small description of a person having an emotion, kind of like what he did for pride, but really that's an example of a person not having pride, what he says in the book, but it kind of gives the character of this. Just give a little vignette. So-and-so had the emotion of shame or pride or embarrassment, anger, because of such and such. But construct one that would not satisfy his criteria for emotional evaluation or would count as defective. Okay. So now give me your response to the Spock problem and also Nozick's response to the Spock problem. Okay. So moving on to the love question, give me the essence of love. And as we discussed in class, there are some counterexamples. There are necessary condition counterexamples and sufficient condition counterexamples, but at least give me one. And maybe to give a kind of a balanced view, what might be the strengths of his definition. Okay, so this you'll kind of need to find in your notes, the autonomy objection and the unconditional love objection discussed in class. Nozick specifically talks about the loss of autonomy. He doesn't necessarily talk about it as an objection to the we. In class, I put up, is we worth it? Quote, we. The loss of autonomy at least gets a challenge up and running to whether or not it's worth it to be in a we if indeed we have to give up autonomy. And I kind of dramatized how big of a deal autonomy is, and thus to be required to give some up would be a big deal. And hence, in order for the we to be worth it, something needs to be said for how that loss is balanced out. So that's where you come in. We did this in class. Also, the unconditional love objection, you'll have to find this in your notes too. In class, we discussed one way of distinguishing conditional and unconditional love that doesn't work, and now how Nozick has a way of phrasing the distinction that avoids the objection that I first considered. So that was in class. Okay. So now finally, consider 3 things that must be true of a person in order for them to be a minimally adequate love candidate for you. This should take into account 2 things: facts about you and facts about what a we are. Putting those together, what would somebody else have to be like in order for them to be a minimally adequate candidate for being in one with you? So I guess here, mostly tell me the specific aspect of a we that you're building your criteria on. Okay, finally, happiness. 2 thought experiments. They're there. Give me Nozick's conclusions and yours, and say a little something about whether you're seeing the same thing, but do include Nozick's also. And then kind of stepping back, what overall conclusion about happiness does this lead to? These are supposed to be telling us something about the nature of happiness. What are we learning about it? And how would that bear on our actual pursuit of happiness? How would that kind of suggest the goals that we set for ourselves, or how we go about achieving them or pursuing them? Okay, 3 forms of happiness that Nozick discusses. At the link here, you'll see I've got a kind of page and a half on one way of delineating the 3rd form of happiness that I call the logic of happiness, where happiness is meta satisfaction. Read through that, and there I ask you to come up with a counterexample to my theory, and that's what I'm asking you to do here. I totally give you the formula for doing it. Be sure to specifically state the example and which condition you're saying doesn't have to be satisfied in that part of the answer. Finally, putting it all together, what does this lead you to think about happiness overall? That's kind of open-ended. Okay, so that's some overview on our essay questions. These should be, I think like 2 full pages of Blue Book. This is a Blue Book right here. They might be called Green Books too. I don't know, this is just some random one. But when I say like 2 sides, maybe like a full side there, and they didn't really quite do a whole another side, but that's just a approximation. It depends on how big you write, depends on what you say, but I would think 2 sides of a large Blue Book would be what a solid answer would take. So go for the details, be thorough, and go for it. Prepare in advance. Okay, see ya.